The rumble of my suitcase wheels on the pavement was the only sound breaking the evening stillness as I approached the Airbnb. The job interview looming in my mind was big. Life, changing big. So I had chosen a place in a quiet neighborhood, thinking it would be peaceful, a good spot to collect my thoughts. From the outside, the house looked normal, almost inviting, with its soft porch light and neatly trimmed hedges. But the moment I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, a wave of unease washed over me. It wasn't anything obvious. The house was clean, well furnished. Yet it felt lived. There were personal items scattered about. A half-full coffee mug on the table, a novel bent open face, down on the couch, and a pair of women's shoes by the door. It was as if I'd walked into someone's interrupted life. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the jitters about tomorrow. Maybe the host or a previous guest had forgotten to clear their stuff. I wandered through the house, my footsteps echoing slightly, taking in the family photos hanging on the walls, the slightly disheveled throws on the couch. Everywhere I looked, there were little signs of someone else's presence. I tried to settle in, unpacking my suitcase and setting up my interview materials on the dining table. But that feeling of intrusion, of not being alone, clung to me. I couldn't concentrate. Every creak and sigh of the house put me on edge. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half, expecting to see someone else there. As night fell, the house grew quieter, yet every small noise seemed amplified. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was just an old house with its quirks. I just needed a good night's sleep, and everything would seem better in the morning. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. The shadows seemed to shift and play tricks on my eyes. I kept hearing soft sounds, like whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and filled with strange, unsettling dreams. I woke up several times, my heart racing, sure that I'd heard a voice or a footstep. But each time, the house was silent. Nothing amiss. By morning, I was a bundle of nerves. I tried to focus on my interview, telling myself that everything would be fine. But deep down, that unsettling feeling from the night before lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of my mind. The morning sun did little to dispel the eerie feeling that had settled over me. I prepared for my interview, trying to focus on the potential life-changing opportunity ahead. But the peculiar sense of intrusion from last night lingered. As I was finishing breakfast, I heard a sound that froze me in place. The creak of a floorboard from upstairs. My heart pounded. I wasn't alone. Tiptoeing towards the stairs, I contemplated whether to confront the intruder or quietly leave. But then she appeared. Descending the stairs was a woman, maybe in her early 30s. She had an effortless beauty, with her hair cascading over her shoulders in loose waves. She smiled at me. "Oh, you must be Alex." "I'm Eva," she said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Her presence was disarming, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of wrongness. "I didn't realize anyone else would be here," I said, my voice tinged with confusion. Eva just laughed, a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet house. I like to keep to myself, usually upstairs. "I hope I didn't startle you." Her demeanor was friendly, almost flirtatious, but something felt off. I tried to engage her in conversation, hoping to understand why she was here, but she skillfully deflected my questions, always steering the conversation back to me. The more we talked, the more unsettled I became. Her questions were probing, almost intrusive, and her gaze was too intense, like she was studying me. I excused myself, saying I needed to get ready for my interview. But her eyes followed me, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Once in the safety of my room, I called the host. His response was immediate and laced with confusion. "No, there should be no one else staying there. Are you sure you saw someone?" His words sent a chill down my spine. Eva wasn't supposed to be here, The house was meant to be mine alone for the stay. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was she? And why was she here? I considered leaving, but the importance of the interview anchored me. I couldn't afford to find another place on such short notice. I decided to stay, to attend the interview, and then figure out what to do about Eva. As I left for the interview, I couldn't shake the feeling of her eyes on me, watching from a window. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken threat. The normalcy of the neighborhood outside felt like a stark contrast to the uncertainty I was leaving behind in that house. Eva's presence, unexplained and unwanted, had turned what should have been a simple stay into something sinister. I couldn't help but wonder what her intentions were and why she was so interested in me. Returning from the interview, the house seemed to loom over me, its windows like watchful eyes. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that Eva was just a quirky housemate, nothing more. But the unease from before was now a palpable dread. That night, the house felt even more oppressive. Strange sounds echoed through the halls, soft thuds, creaking floors, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. I told myself it was just the house settling, but it felt like something more, something deliberate. Eva's presence grew more unsettling. She seemed to appear and disappear at will, her behavior increasingly erratic. One moment she was overly friendly, smiling and chatting as if we were old friends. The next, she was distant, her eyes cold and calculating. I felt trapped. The thought of staying another night filled me with dread, but the importance of the interview process kept me anchored. I couldn't leave. Not yet. I decided to confront Eva, to demand answers about who she was and why she was here. But when I tried, my resolve crumbled. There was something about her, an intensity that made my words catch in my throat. She brushed off my questions with a laugh, her gaze unsettlingly sharp. "You worry too much, Alex," she said, her voice light but her eyes dark. Sleep was elusive that night. Every sound jolted me awake, heart racing. I was sure I heard footsteps outside my door, a shadow flitting past the crack under the door. The house felt alive, watching, waiting. The next day was a blur of interviews and meetings, but my mind was elsewhere, fixated on the house and Eva. When I finally returned, the tension was unbearable. The house was silent, too silent, as if holding its breath. And then I saw him, a man, standing in the shadows of the hallway. My blood ran cold. Eva introduced him casually as Jake, but his presence sent alarm bells ringing in my head. There was something menacing about him, something predatory. That night, the house was a symphony of terror. The strange noises were louder, more aggressive. I could hear muffled conversations, Eva and Jake's voices intertwining in a sinister melody. The words were indistinct, but the intent was clear. They were talking about me. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear. I knew I had to leave, but the thought of stepping out of my room, of facing Eva and Jake, was terrifying. The darkness of the house felt suffocating, the walls closing in on me. I realized then that I wasn't just a guest in this house. I was prey. The night was a canvas of shadows and fear, each creak of the house amplifying my anxiety. After overhearing the disturbing conversation between Eva and Jake, I knew I couldn't dismiss their presence as mere coincidence or harmless eccentricity. They were planning something sinister, and it involved me. My decision to stay, once rooted in necessity, now felt like a grave mistake. I lay in bed, my thoughts racing with scenarios of what they might do. The air in the room felt thick, charged with an impending sense of doom. I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not even for a moment. The trust I had in the safety of these walls had shattered, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. My mind replayed Eva's cryptic words and Jake's ominous presence. The pieces started to fall into place, forming a picture I couldn't deny. They weren't just random intruders. Their intentions were deliberate, targeted at me. As the hours ticked by, a new sound pierced the silence. A soft, deliberate footstep outside my room. My heart leaped to my throat. They were coming. This wasn't just paranoia. The danger was real and immediate. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. It was now or never. Moving quickly, I grabbed my phone and a few essentials, my actions fueled by adrenaline. I had to get out without alerting them, had to escape before their sinister plans unfolded. With every step towards the door, my anxiety peaked. I reached it, turning the handle slowly, painstakingly, to avoid any noise. The door opened to a dark, silent hallway. My heart was thunderous in the dead quiet of the house. I tiptoed through the hallway, hyper, aware of every sound, every shadow. Reaching the main door felt like an eternity. With trembling hands, I unlocked it, the click of the lock sounding deafening in my ears. As I opened the door, a chill of the night air hit me, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. I stepped out, and at that moment, a floorboard creaked loudly behind me. I didn't dare look back. I knew they were there, watching. I ran. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, away from the house, away from Eva and Jake, away from the nightmare that had ensnared me. The cold night air filled my lungs, but I didn't stop. Not until I was far enough to be safe, to be free from the grasp of that house and its sinister occupants. The night enveloped me, a lone figure fleeing from unseen horrors, from a terror that had lurked behind the facade of an ordinary Airbnb. Panting, my heart still racing from the flight, I found myself in the safety of a bustling, well-lit street. The normalcy of it all, the people walking by, chatting, laughing, seemed surreal after the nightmare I'd just escaped. I clutched my phone, fingers trembling, and dialed the police. The wait for them to arrive was agonizing. Every shadow seemed to whisper threats, and I kept glancing back towards the direction of the Airbnb, half, expecting to see Eva or Jake emerge from the darkness. When the police arrived, I recounted my story, my voice wavering with a mixture of fear and relief. The officers exchanged skeptical glances, but promised to check the house. I insisted on not going back, the memory of my harrowing escape still fresh and raw. They returned sooner than I expected, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. The house was completely empty. No sign of Eva or Jake, no evidence of anyone having been there except for my belongings scattered in my haste to leave. The Airbnb host was called, and his reaction only deepened the mystery. He was genuinely baffled, insisting that the house had been rented to me alone, and that he had no knowledge of any Eva or Jake. The police suggested it might have been a break-in, but nothing was missing or out of place, except for the unsettling signs of someone else's presence I had noticed upon arrival. In the following days, I grappled with a torrent of emotions. Fear, confusion, disbelief. I replayed the events over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of them. Had Eva and Jake been real? Or had I stumbled into some elaborate, twisted game? I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. Every shadow, every unfamiliar face in the crowd made my heart skip a beat. The experience had left a scar, a deep-seated paranoia that refused to fade. The Airbnb was thoroughly investigated, but no further evidence was found. No fingerprints, no forgotten items, nothing to prove that Eva and Jake had ever been there. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the scattered remnants of their presence and the haunting memory of my encounter with them. I moved on eventually, but the experience lingered in the back of my mind. A dark, unresolved mystery. The questions remained unanswered, the fear unassuaged. What had their intentions been? Why me? But some questions are better left unasked. Some mysteries better left unsolved. For in the search for answers, one might just find themselves spiraling back into the shadows, back into the terror of that night. And that is a journey I am not willing to take.